This guy, a hardened gangster, fresh out of prison, is intimidating. Think face tattoos, piercing stare, the whole 9 yards. First thing he does? Swaps clothes with a buddy, who also just released. A smart move to throw off any rival gangsters looking to collect old debts. His next stop? An animal hospital. He's there to pick up his beloved dog. But there's devastating news. The vet tells him his dog has an incurable disease and is about to die. He pulls out a thick wad of cash from his bag, paying the vet for the care, no questions asked. Then, he takes his dying dog to a 5-star hotel, booking their most luxurious suite. This gangster's name is Rai. Growing up in an orphanage, he always clung to hope, but he learned a harsh lesson. In this cold world, you need money to survive, and to get money, you need to be tough. So, he cultivated this fearsome persona to avoid being a target. Underneath the rough exterior, though, beats a kind heart. His dog? A stray he found abandoned on the street. He took the poor creature in and treated it like family. Now, with his dog's death sentence, Rai feels an emptiness inside. He's lost, unsure of what the future holds. The piles of cash on the table and the extravagant presidential suite mean nothing to him. Meanwhile, across town, there's a hospice, a place for people nearing the end of their lives. But this isn't a gloomy place. It's filled with light. Captain Kang, just arriving from his ambulance shift, visits the patients. After enjoying a delicious meal prepared by the kind cook in the cafeteria, he helps 3 elderly patients with their baths. These folks are frail, and their movements are slow, but they're filled with joy as they watch the snow falling outside the window. Captain Kang tells them it seems like heaven heard their prayers and sent the snow. But here's the twist. Outside, a group of people are spraying fake snow into the air. They're the Genie team, a special group at the hospice. They come from all walks of life, young and old, men and women, different jobs, united by their kind hearts. Their mission? To grant the dying patient's final wishes, whether big or small. And today, they brought the magic of snow. The Genie team has a knack for turning the mundane into the magical, using these small miracles to soothe the anxieties of those facing their final moments. After the baths, Captain Kang loads the 3 elderly patients into his ambulance, ready to fulfill their dying wish, to return to their seaside hometown one last time. Their health is fragile, and the long journey is a risk, but Captain Kang is determined to make it happen. The next day, Rai checks out of the 5-star hotel with his dog. Sitting lost and aimless at a bus stop, he glances up at a billboard showcasing a beautiful blue beach. An idea sparks in his mind. Before his dog passes, he'll take it to the ocean. He immediately buys new clothes and, with another wad of cash, purchases a car from a used car dealer. But the dealer, also a gangster, notices a flash of a tattoo under Rai's sleeve, a distinctive rose. He instantly recognizes the infamous gangster. Unaware of the danger closing in, Rai sets off on his road trip with his dog. Coincidentally, the beach Rai is heading towards is the same seaside town where Captain Kang's elderly patient longs to return. Captain Kang's ambulance is already on the road, accompanied by Nurse Yanju, who is monitoring the elderly patient's condition. Halfway through the journey, their worst fears are realized. The patient stops breathing. Yanju frantically performs CPR, while Captain Kang floors the gas pedal, desperate to reach their destination. Meanwhile, the gangsters are hot on Rai's tail. Sensing trouble, he speeds up, weaving recklessly through traffic. As he approaches road construction, he can't brake in time and crashes, causing a pileup that involves several cars, including Captain Kang's ambulance. The impact injures Captain Kang's leg, making it impossible for him to drive. He climbs out of the wrecked ambulance and confronts Rai, demanding he take responsibility and drive the dying man the rest of the way. With the sound of approaching gangsters and the urgency of Captain Kang's plea, Rai, along with his dog, reluctantly gets behind the wheel of the ambulance. Upon learning their destination is Donghae Beach, Rai doesn't hesitate. He slams the gas pedal, tossing a wad of cash out the window, compensation for the accident, and a way to deter the pursuing gangsters. Miraculously, the elderly man is still alive when they arrive at the beach. He embraces his wife's grave, his trembling hands tracing the inscription on her tombstone, as if holding her hand one last time. A vision of his deceased wife appears, her image vibrant and smiling. In the soft glow of the setting sun, he sees himself sitting with her, laughing and talking. She won't be alone anymore. Surrounded by this comforting image, the old man peacefully passes away. Meanwhile, Rai sits on the beach with his dog. The initial novelty of the ocean fades, and despair washes over him again. He's brought his dog to the sea, and now there's nothing left to experience. nothing left to live for. He clutches his dog and walks into the water. A memory surfaces of a woman who told him that for people like them, living or dying didn't matter. He flashes back to that moment, the woman lighting a charcoal burner, sealing the room, letting the fumes fill the air. He escaped then, clutching his dog, desperate to survive. Now, he's walking down that same path, tears welling in his eyes. He wades deeper into the ocean, until Captain Kang's voice calls him back. Pointing to his injured leg, Captain Kang demands that Geo Rai take responsibility for his actions. This unexpected interruption pulls Geo Rai back from the brink. They head to the police station. During questioning, Captain Kang notices a large burn scar on Geo Rai's back. Something clicks. Outside the station, he asks about the scar. Geo Rai refuses to talk, walking away with his dog. Captain Kang watches him go, wondering if Geo Rai is someone he's encountered before. After the elderly man's passing, his children gather for the funeral, immediately criticizing Captain Kang and Yeonju for taking their ailing father on such a risky trip. The truth is that these children were absent throughout their father's illness, shirking their responsibilities. Captain Kang, despite his injured leg, limps into the funeral hall and unflinchingly calls them out on their hypocrisy, exposing their neglect to everyone present. Their lack of genuine grief is evident. They're only there for the insurance money. The daughter suddenly notices the watch on Captain Kang's wrist. It belonged to her father. She explodes, accusing him of stealing. Captain Kang calmly explains it was a gift. The old man's time was up, so he gave his remaining time to him. After this explanation, Captain Kang delivers a parting shot. "You're garbage," and walks out. However, Captain Kang's leg injury prevents him from driving. The hospital needs a temporary driver, and his mind goes to Geo Rai, the man who caused the accident. Meanwhile, Geo Rai is in court, sentenced to a 5 million won fine for the traffic violation. Despite having plenty of cash, he refuses to pay, arguing the state has never done anything for him. So why should he pay them? Captain Kang observes him from the back of the courtroom. After the hearing, Geo Rai returns to the hotel, only to find gangsters inquiring about him at the front desk. He's about to make a run for it, but remembers his dog is still in the room. Thinking fast, he buys a hotel employee's uniform, puts it on, and slips out with his dog. With nowhere to go, he heads back to the animal hospital, seeking out Dr. Jin Gu, the only person he trusts. Jin Gu, another orphanage alum, is a childhood acquaintance. Seeing Geo Rai's attachment to the clearly suffering dog, Jin Gu advises him to let it go. Geo Rai considers this and agrees, but as the vet tries to take the dog, it struggles fiercely, running back to Geo Rai. Geo Rai understands. His dog doesn't want to die, even in pain. Maybe, he thinks, it has a final wish. He leaves the animal hospital with his dog. As he gets into his car, he sees a text message from the court. He's been ordered to perform community service at the hospice. He thinks for a moment, then decides to go. Of course, this is all part of Captain Kang's plan. The next day, Captain Kang waits. After a long wait, a flashy red convertible pulls up. Geo Rai steps out, immediately scoffing at the rundown appearance of the hospice. Yeonju immediately recognizes Geo Rai as the guy from the accident and kicks his car's side mirror, shattering it. The tension between them is palpable. A few days earlier, Geo Rai had sped past her on his way to the hospice, knocking her into a muddy ditch. Yeonju isn't the only one disappointed. The whole hospice staff is underwhelmed. They were expecting a dedicated social worker, not a tattooed gangster. Only Captain Kang seems willing to give Geo Rai a chance, taking him on a tour of the facility. Inside, a nun tells Captain Kang about an elderly man who's nearing the end and suggests he act quickly to fulfill the man's final wish. Captain Kang gets the message. He immediately ushers Geo Rai back into the car. Noticing Geo Rai has brought his dog along, Captain Kang remarks that he's the only person he's ever seen bring a pet to community service. He asks if Geo Rai has no one to look after the dog, but Geo Rai just gives him a stony look of agreement. Captain Kang drops the subject, and they set off. They arrive at a rundown neighborhood, identifying the elderly man's house by a rose bush out front. Captain Kang rings the doorbell, introduces himself, and is met with a torrent of verbal abuse from a woman inside. She calls him a member of a crazy religious cult, wasting his time on pointless endeavors. The woman's tirade infuriates Geo Rai. He hops the fence and enters the yard. Looking up, he sees the woman holding a braided rope, clearly distraught. Fearing she's about to attempt suicide, he jumps back over the fence and starts banging on the door, but Captain Kang pulls him away. That evening, the woman's husband and children return home. She greets them at the door, but they offer no response. Except for the woman, The family members are eerily silent, like dolls. Captain Kang and Geo Rai remain outside, observing. Sitting in the car, they discuss the family's strange lack of communication. Captain Kang mentions a TV show about families who live together but never speak. As Geo Rai talks about family relationships, expressing his belief that it's the most unfair social construct, Captain Kang realizes he harbors deep resentment towards his own family. He observes that some people spend their entire lives trying to heal from the wounds inflicted by their families, and Geo Rai seems to be one of them. Despite his efforts, Captain Kang fails to persuade the woman's husband to visit the dying man. Before they leave, the woman asks Captain Kang about the old man's remaining time. He tells her it's likely less than a week. Back inside the house, the woman expresses regret, saying the old house seems to mean so much to someone. Yet her family hates it so much. They used to live in a luxury apartment, but her failed stock investments cost them a fortune, forcing them to move into this dilapidated place. Back at the hospice, it's dinner time. Captain Kang invites Geo Rai to join them. Watching the genie team happily sharing a giant bowl of bibimbap, Geo Rai feels out of place. He stays only briefly before leaving. Passing a patient's room, he attempts to mediate an argument between two women, but the aggressive patient makes it impossible. He decides to leave the hospice altogether. On his way out, one of the genie team members offers him a box of food, but he refuses, uncomfortable with her unexpected kindness. The next day, Geo Rai tries to return the convertible to the dealership, but the dealer offers him a ridiculously low price. As Geo Rai turns to leave, the dealer tries to entice him with other cars. Geo Rai, now enraged, kicks off the car's side mirror, a not-so-subtle reminder that he knows the dealer set him up with the gangsters. Meanwhile, Captain Kang continues his efforts to persuade the woman's family. Every day he visits their house, cleans their yard and car, and even sends the woman delicious food. His relentless kindness and patience finally break through their indifference. They send Captain Kang a message. They'll postpone their move by a week, allowing the old man to return to his home. Captain Kang happily shares the news with Geo Rai. That night, Geo Rai stays at the hospice, not because he has nowhere else to go, but because he notices his dog seems comfortable there. The next day, the genie team prepares to take the old man home. Before leaving, the doctor reminds Yanju to be careful, still shaken by the previous accident. It turns out not everyone at the hospital supports the genie team. Some medical staff argue that everyone works hard to care for the patients, and kindness is universal. Why should the genie team get special recognition for fulfilling final wishes? Yanju doesn't offer a rebuttal, simply smiling and bidding her colleagues farewell. Geo Rai drives the ambulance, speeding along with the elderly man in the back. Captain Kang tells him to slow down, reminding him there's a patient on board. Geo Rai callously replies that the old man's dying anyway, so what's the point? This instantly enrages Captain Kang. He slams on the brakes, pulls Geo Rai out of the vehicle, and lays into him. Every life is precious, he argues, and the old man's life is just as valuable as Geo Rai's. Geo Rai, unrepentant, yells back at Captain Kang, blaming him for saving him at the beach. Why did he bother, he asks, if he just wanted to die? Captain Kang struggles to contain his anger, eventually regaining his composure. He tells Geo Rai to just finish his community service and stop saying upsetting things. Geo Rai, also calming down, gets back behind the wheel and drives them to the house. Before their arrival, the house had been restored to the way it looked when the old man lived there. Lying in bed, he looks out the window and sees the rose bush in the yard, now laden with bright orange-yellow rose ships, seemingly overnight. Even Captain Kang is amazed. Yanju quietly tells him that Geo Rai did it. He had overheard the old man reminiscing about the bush being full of rose ships and, wanting to bring him joy, spent the night crafting fake ones and hanging them on the branches. Captain Kang looks at the sleeping Geo Rai, realizing he isn't completely beyond redemption. Perhaps, he muses, those who feel the most despair in the world are the ones who give the most when they experience kindness. That evening, Geo Rai and Captain Kang return to the hospice to sort through some of the old man's belongings. While cleaning, Geo Rai notices his dog has wandered off. He searches the hallways, finding the dog standing in front of a keypad, locked patient room. Geo Rai is curious. All the other rooms are unlocked. What makes this one so special? He tries to open the door, but Captain Kang stops him, offering a bizarre explanation. The room is haunted. Geo Rai, of course, doesn't buy it, assuming Captain Kang is messing with him. Just then, Captain Kang receives a text from Yanju, urging him to return to the old house. The elderly man seems to be fading fast. The genie team has prepared a feast. Everyone is cheerful, but Geo Rai remains aloof, keeping to himself. Only when the old man smiles at him does Geo Rai manage a stiff smile in return. The old man's daughter arrives, along with her foreign husband and their children. Father and daughter had a falling out years ago and haven't spoken since. But with the old man nearing the end, old grudges melt away. They reconcile, and his blonde, blue-eyed granddaughter sings him a Korean folk song. In the sweet melody, he sees a vision of his wife and young daughter playing in their backyard, the happiest memory of his life. At dinner, Geo Rai still isolates himself, sitting on the steps outside, picking at some smoked meat, the sounds of laughter drifting out to him, his face etched with loneliness. He seems to want to join in, but doesn't know how. Even smiling doesn't come easily to him. There's another unexpected guest at the gathering, the eldest son of the woman who lives in the old house. When he arrives to retrieve some forgotten belongings, Captain Kang invites him to join the meal. He takes a bite and is surprised by how delicious the food is. It nourishes not just his body, but his soul. Later that evening, he calls his mother for the first time in ages, and they meet by the lake to talk. He realizes the old house, a place he'd grown to resent, is a treasure to someone else. It dawns on him that happiness isn't determined by surroundings, but by one's inner state. He asks his mother why she agreed to Captain Kang's request. She tells him it's because she finally got yelled at. Since their financial hardship, their home has been filled with a chilling silence. No one spoke, and that silence was more painful than any argument. She longed for someone to yell at her, to break the silence, but everyone in her family had remained mute. Geo Rai, during his visit to their home, was the first person to yell at her. He'd seen her with the rope, about to take her own life. Before leaving, he reminds her that suicide is harder than living, and deep down, she doesn't really want to die. The clean laundry in the yard, the potted plants, someone truly despairing wouldn't bother maintaining such things. She's puzzled by how his words could move her so deeply, but the important thing is, she and her son have reconnected. That evening, the old man lies by the window, gazing at the rose bush. As he closes his eyes, he sees himself getting out of bed and walking towards the bush. His wife appears and takes his hand, and together, they walk into a bright white light. During the night, the old man peacefully passes away. Geo Rai arrives with a real rowship for the old man, only to find him unresponsive. Yeonju checks for a pulse and confirms he's gone. The suddenness of it leaves Geo Rai bewildered and unsure how to react. But he realizes death isn't always tragic. For some, it's a passage to a better place. Later, Geo Rai meets the vet for drinks. Drunk, he confesses why he trusts the vet so implicitly. It's because the vet didn't smile at him during their first encounter. Geo Rai is wary of smiles. In his experience, they often precede violence or betrayal, particularly from his father. He was once innocent, but deceit and hardship have made him hyper-vigilant, unable to trust friendly gestures. When the vet drops Geo Rai back at the hospice, he asks Captain Kang if he smiled at Geo Rai when they first met. Captain Kang says no, he yells at him instead. Reassured, the vet leaves Geo Rai in Captain Kang's care without a second thought. The next morning, Geo Rai wakes up in an unfamiliar room at the hospice. Yeonju is outside playing with his dog. To pay for Geo Rai's car repair, she's had to break her apartment lease and has nowhere to live. It seems she'll be staying at the hospice too. Captain Kang enters, preparing breakfast. Geo Rai brings up the mysterious locked room again, wondering if it's really haunted. Captain Kang plays along, saying a flesh-eating ghost lives inside, sucking the life and happiness out of people. Geo Rai scoffs, muttering, "That's a weird ghost," and walks away. Today, he has to attend volunteer training. The first session, writing a will. Geo Rai is bored and barely pays attention. That night, the gangster boss visits the incarcerated woman, Jun Jong. He demands to know Geo Rai's whereabouts and the location of the money he stole from them. She laughs, pointing out she's hardly in a position to know anything while locked up. She reminds him how he exploited her, forcing her to work as a hostess, earning over $1 billion, of which he only gave her $300 million. He used her, and she had no intention of helping him. At the hospice, a young woman named Se-hee suffers from a painful illness. The pain makes her irritable and lash out at those around her. But in her calmer moments, she's gentle and has a beautiful singing voice. She approaches Captain Kang with a wish. During their conversation, Se-hee asks why he chose this line of work, fulfilling his final wishes. Captain Kang explains that dying people often long to be surrounded by family, but instead, they find themselves alone, which adds another layer of suffering. He wants to be their last comfort. Se-hee's wish seems difficult. She wants to meet her favorite celebrity. She's nervous about asking, but Captain Kang assures her he'll make it happen. He has one condition. She must sincerely apologize to everyone she's mistreated. Yeonju is among those Se-hee has verbally abused, but she readily accepts the apology, gently embracing Se-hee. Geo-rai happens to walk by, and, embarrassed by the display of affection, quickly looks away. Yeonju tells Se-hee that while pain is scary, it's not always something to endure. Letting it out can bring comfort. Knowing Geo-rai is within earshot, she emphasizes this point. Sometimes if there's pain in your heart, it's better to yell than to suffer in silence. It allows others to offer compassion. Despite his confident promise, Captain Kang has no idea how to fulfill Se-hee's wish. He ends up dragging Geo-rai with him to ambush the celebrity outside a performance venue. He convinces Geo-rai to distract the staff while he slips backstage, hoping to make a personal plea to the celebrity, but the star brushes him off, mistaking him for a stalker, and Captain Kang is unceremoniously ejected by the celebrity's fans. Geo-rai is furious and ready to brawl, but Captain Kang holds him back. On the drive home, Geo-rai is indignant, pointing out the humiliation Captain Kang endures for this job. But Captain Kang seems unfazed, cheerfully carrying on. Later that night, before going to sleep, Geo-rai thinks about the genie team. He finds himself trusting them, believing that if he ever felt pain, these people would find a way to ease it. In the quiet darkness of the hospice, the cook enters room 403, the supposedly haunted room. She then calls Captain Kang, informing him someone is living there. Geo-rai stays at the hospice again. He dreams of his past, of protecting a young Junjeong from bullies. Later, as a young woman forced to live stream to make a living, she declares that death is better than this life. They attempt suicide by charcoal burning. He wakes up the next morning. The cook asks him to run an errand. He grumbles but obediently takes his dog and goes. The shopkeeper, recognizing him as a hospice volunteer, not only refuses payment but gives him a lollipop, praising his kindness. Geo-rai awkwardly accepts the candy. Leaving the store, he reaches for a cigarette but hesitates. The word, kindness, seems to echo in his mind, beginning to influence his thoughts and actions. He throws the cigarette away, deciding to try being good. After Captain Kang's persistent efforts, the celebrity agrees to visit the hospice. Everyone gathers at the gate to welcome him. A fancy car pulls up, and the star emerges, looking dapper. Captain Kang approaches, but the celebrity explains he's not there out of the goodness of his heart. He received a letter. Someone sent him a picture of a beautiful Se-hee, and he was instantly moved. Just then, Se-hee arrives in a wheelchair, looking frail and nothing like the picture. The celebrity can't believe it's her, looking around in disbelief until she introduces herself. He accepts the reality and listens to her wish. She wants to leverage his star power to stage a musical at the hospice. Besides the two of them, they need 7 more cast members. People volunteer, and Yeonju and the cook are among those chosen. Geo-rai, unsure what's happening, steps forward and is also cast. Se-hee pulls out her script and assigns roles. Geo-rai and Yeonju are paired as lovers. Geo-rai grumbles, but doesn't object. After the casting call, Se-hee approaches Geo-rai with a bag of cookies. She remembers yelling at him and wants to apologize and thank him for participating. Over the next few days, the genie team members practice their dance moves whenever they can. Geo-rai complains but diligently participates. Captain Kang is delighted by his transformation. In the cafeteria, the cook brings Geo-rai a bowl of curry, teasing that he and Captain Kang are like father and son. Because Geo-rai keeps refusing her food, she's determined to make him something he'll enjoy. Looking at the curry, Geo-rai flashes back to his orphanage days, making curry for Junjeong. He was a gentler, happier boy then. Snapping back to the present, he says curry is probably his 3rd favorite food and starts eating. Undeterred, the cook vows to discover his top 2. Later, Geo-rai helps the cook prepare dinner. He asks about a photo he saw in Captain Kang's car, a picture of him with a boy. The cook says Captain Kang has a son, but she doesn't know the details. Yeonju enters the kitchen, and the cook offers her a taste of the dish she and Geo-rai made. Geo-rai spoons some onto her plate, and then gently wipes a sauce stain from her lip. This small, tender gesture makes her heart flutter and blush. She quickly excuses herself. The musical is taking shape. They begin their first rehearsal, including Geo-rai and Yeonju's romantic scene. Geo-rai is incredibly awkward, fumbling his lines and making everyone laugh. They question whether he's ever even been in love. He insists he has. That evening, an elderly woman at the hospice passes away. Geo-rai and Captain Kang transport her body to the funeral home. After the ambulance leaves, Yeonju sits by the roadside, her ankle throbbing from an injury she sustained earlier while visiting the elderly woman. A doctor arrives and, noticing her discomfort, uses a cooling spray on her ankle. He's had a long-standing crush on Yeonju, but he disapproves of the genie team, believing death is an equalizer and doesn't warrant special treatment. He asks about Geo Rai, and when Yeonju talks about him, a smile spreads across her face, much to the doctor's dismay. Initially, she saw Geo Rai as a hopeless thug, but his actions have changed her perception. He complains, but he always gets the job done. The doctor, unwittingly, has just discovered a rival. Geo Rai and Captain Kang return to the hospice at dawn. Geo Rai sleeps in the ambulance, while Captain Kang speaks with the doctor. He knows the doctor doesn't like the genie team's work, but encourages him to be more understanding. Geo Rai sleeps in the ambulance all day. When he wakes up, he sees the picture of Captain Kang and his son hanging from the rearview mirror. Getting out of the vehicle, he notices a light on in room 403. He rushes inside to ask Yeonju about it. She's at the front desk, fighting sleep. Just as her head starts to nod, Geo Rai catches it. This gives him a chance to study her face. He decides she's not pretty enough. When Yeonju opens her eyes and sees him holding her head, she mistakenly thinks he's playing with her hair. She retaliates by grabbing his hair, and he yelps, letting go. He drops the hair issue and asks about room 403 and the supposed ghost. Yeonju deflects, explaining it's a storage room, briefly a patient room, then converted to storage. The ghost story is nonsense, she insists. The next day, the celebrity returns to the hospice for another rehearsal. He and Sehee have several scenes involving physical contact. During these moments, the celebrity starts to feel something for Sehee, particularly during a hand-holding scene. After rehearsal, Sehee gifts him a pair of gloves. Seeing her genuine smile and receiving such a thoughtful present, the celebrity's heart skips a beat. He's falling for Sehee, but a sadness hangs over him. The outcome of this affection is all too clear. His assistant offers a simple piece of advice: if you're in love, go for it. Love shouldn't be delayed or suppressed. Don't worry about the outcome. Rehearsals intensify as the performance date approaches. The stage is set up in the hospice courtyard, with a colorful backdrop painted and lights strung up. During set construction, Geo Rai notices Yeonju struggling to lift heavy objects, exercising during breaks. He asks why she pushes herself so hard. Yeonju reveals her mother was a cancer patient. One night, when her mother's pain became unbearable, Yeonju called an ambulance and carried her mother out of a dark alley. It was a cold, snowy night, and Yeonju, being frail, quickly became exhausted. She was angry at her weakness. From that day on, she trained to become stronger, believing that with enough strength, she could help her patients. After sharing her story, Yeonju receives a call from the doctor. Sehee's condition is worsening. He advises against her participating in the musical, but Sehee's will is strong. She refuses to give up the stage, even if it means dying on it. The doctor can't condone this. His medical ethics won't allow him to watch a patient die needlessly. Yeonju tries to reason with him, but he snaps at her, warning her not to encourage Sehee. Geo Rai overhears their argument, and, unable to stay silent, speaks up in Yeonju's defense. The doctor, furious, orders Geo Rai to leave the hospice. Geo Rai, with newfound seriousness, declares he's a member of the genie team and isn't going anywhere. The doctor and Yeonju continue their argument outside. Their perspectives clash. The doctor wants his patients to live their final days without pain, while the genie team prioritizes fulfilling their final wishes. Later, Captain Kang speaks with the doctor. He reveals he too had cancer. Thanks to the doctor's care, he lived for 2 more years when he was only given 6 months. Looking back at his shortened life, he has regrets, but his time at the hospice has given him purpose and cherished memories. Captain Kang's final wish is for the doctor to stay out of his business and let him live his remaining time helping patients and doing what he believes is meaningful. Yeonju also opens up to Geo Rai, explaining her history with the doctor. They weren't always at odds. Yeonju used to work in the ER, where the focus was saving lives at all costs. But at the hospice, she felt powerless, watching patients die, and she hated it. The doctor supported her during that difficult transition. He finally relents, agreeing to administer pain medication to Sehee so she can perform. It's the last thing he can do for her as a doctor. That evening, the performance begins. With the pain medication, Sehee is radiant, dressed as a princess alongside the celebrity prince. They take the stage hand in hand for their musical, Miracle of Love. Sehee shines, no longer a patient but a performer. Her dedication moves the audience to tears, especially her parents. Backstage, Yeonju and Geo Rai talk about dreams. Yeonju asks Geo Rai about his. He's never considered the question. Dreams seem like unattainable luxuries. Yeonju suggests Dreams don't have to be grand. Even gaining a kilogram of muscle each year could be a dream. It's simple, but it still counts. As they talk, Se-hee's boyfriend arrives. He and Se-hee were college sweethearts who met while auditioning for a musical. They have fond memories of practicing together, performing together, and cleaning the theater together. Those days, striving for their shared dream, were filled with joy. He had to give up his dream of being a musical actor due to a vocal cord issue. Seeing him, the celebrity brings him on stage to take his place and finish the performance. He and Se-hee perform together, their movements perfectly synchronized, just like in rehearsals years ago. It's their first and last time on stage together, a dream finally realized. As the performance nears its end, Yeonju and Jae-rai take their places for their scene. The music swells, and Yeonju delivers her line, looking directly at Jae-rai. "I love you." As scripted, Jae-rai moves towards her. However, he bumps into her, and their lips accidentally touch. Amidst the audience's laughter, Yeonju and Jae-rai are both a little flustered. The doctor, who has come to watch the performance, quietly slips away after it ends. In another corner of the audience, a young man with bleached blonde hair has also been watching. He'd previously had a negative encounter with the celebrity and even sued him. But after seeing the performance, he decides to drop the lawsuit. The celebrity today seems different, not entirely the bad guy he thought he was. To thunderous applause, Se-hee smiles, bidding farewell to the audience, the medical staff, Captain Kang, and the other patients. She offers a special thanks to the celebrity. While her boyfriend is her true love, performing with the celebrity has been a lifelong dream. The celebrity wishes her well, and they promise to meet again. Tears mix with Se-hee's smile. After the performance, Se-hee's family takes her home. Captain Kang helps her into the car. Jae-rai notices Captain Kang accepting money from Se-hee's family, and then sees him with a valuable-looking box. He gets into his car, counts the money, and places it in the box. Not long after arriving home, Se-hee sends a letter. Yeonju, imitating Se-hee's voice, reads it aloud to everyone. Se-hee thanks them for helping her fulfill her dream, and says if they meet again in the future, she'll sing for them again. She just hopes that day won't come too soon, and that everyone lives a long life. Overwhelmed, Jae-rai retreats to the ambulance to compose himself. The other hospice workers are used to this. Newcomers often struggle with the emotional impact of patient deaths. Yeonju comforts him, asking if he's ever experienced a moment of true happiness. He deflects, but she persists. Happiness doesn't have to be something monumental, she explains. Enjoying a delicious meal, laughing with friends, feeling loved, these are all forms of happiness. Jae-rai replies that he's never experienced happiness. He's never enjoyed a good meal, never been comforted by friends. But when she mentions love, he falls silent. Yeonju misinterprets his silence, assuming he has feelings for her and wants to date. She becomes flustered. Finally, she encourages Jae-rai to find a dream and experience some genuine happiness before he dies. Later, Jae-rai confronts Captain Kang, asking directly if he took money from Se-hee's family. Captain Kang is caught off guard. Surprised Jae-rai sees him. He doesn't answer and walks away. Among the genie team is the head cook. Her son lives in England and rarely contacts her. Their phone calls feel like a chore. He says a few words and hangs up. He hasn't been home in 3 years, but this year, he's unexpectedly coming for a visit. She misses him terribly. Sometimes, seeing a happy family in the elevator, she avoids getting in. A patient injured by a wild boar is brought to the hospice for emergency treatment. While focused on end-of-life care, they also handle regular medical emergencies. The doctor treating the patient notices Jae-rai's dog nearby and finds it distracting. After the surgery, Jae-rai tends to the patient, but Captain Kang complains about his massage technique. Jae-rai grows increasingly irritated, but realizing his community service is almost over, he's relieved. He'll soon be free of this place. The patient, watching their bickering, laughs, calling it tough love. The doctor tells Jae-rai to get rid of the dog, citing hygiene concerns. He still doesn't approve of Captain Kang and the genie team's work, suggesting Jae-rai would be better off learning first aid. Jae-rai pretends indifference, but the phrase, wasting time, stings. He asks Yeonju to teach him CPR. She misinterprets this as a clumsy attempt to get closer to her. When Yeonju sees Jae-rai smiling at his dog, she can't help but smile too. In the dappled sunlight, her heart races. Overhearing a patient mention the doctor's intention to remove Jae-rai's dog, she confronts the doctor on Jae-rai's behalf. The dog is always created, she argues, posing minimal hygiene risk. There's no reason to banish it. The doctor questions her again, asking why she gets so riled up whenever Geo Rai is involved. Flustered, she dismisses it as a misunderstanding and leaves. Elsewhere, a man approaches Geo Rai with a disturbing request. He wants Geo Rai to kill him. He's tired of living. His doctor gave him a month to live, but he's lingered for 8. His wife is exhausted from caring for him, and he can't bear to see her suffer anymore. He figures Geo Rai, with his criminal record, wouldn't hesitate to harm a dying man. Geo Rai, stunned by the proposition, gives the man a look of bewildered pity and walks away without a word. Meanwhile, Captain Kang is confronted under a bridge by a group of menacing men. Their leader accuses him of harming someone who owed them money. Captain Kang demands proof. The man swings a golf club at Captain Kang's legs, but he dodges it easily. The man claims this is proof. Why would a man with functioning legs use a cane and feign a disability? He must be up to something shady. Geo Rai happens in this scene. After observing the confrontation, he approaches Captain Kang, demanding to know what he's hiding. Taking money from patients' families, faking a disability, it all looks suspicious. Captain Kang doesn't answer, simply telling him, "Go ahead and call the cops," before hurrying away. A young boy, Hyung Jun, is hit by a car while crossing the street. The driver, seeing no witnesses, flees the scene. Hyung Jun is rushed to the hospital. His family waits anxiously outside the operating room, but the prognosis is grim. The accident attracts media attention, with reporters swarming the hospital, further distressing Hyung Jun's parents. Hyung Jun's friend Seo Jin sits by his bedside, holding his hand, determined to fulfill his wish. She seeks out Captain Kang, wanting revenge on the hit-and-run driver. Meanwhile, reporters besiege the driver's home, demanding answers. The couple acts as if nothing happened, but their daughter is deeply disturbed and unable to speak to her father. She was in the car that night. The driver, drowsy and inattentive, hit Hyung Jun as he crossed the street. The girl is traumatized, experiencing nightmares and even episodes of lost consciousness. Hearing of Seo Jin's desire for revenge, Geo Rai goes to her school and finds her being bullied. This triggers painful memories of his own childhood. At the orphanage, he was often bullied and unfairly treated because he arrived alone. Once his friend stole food and planted it on him, making him the scapegoat. Later, as a young man working a menial job, his boss withheld his wages. When he demanded his pay, he was brutally beaten. Now, Seo Jin is consumed with thoughts of Hyung Jun, who was talking to her on the phone at the time of the accident. She's filled with guilt, believing that if she hadn't called, if she hadn't been singing to him, the accident wouldn't have happened. Seeing her distress, Geo Rai promises to help her get revenge. That night, Yeonju is on duty at the hospice. Geo Rai joins her for a chat. She's heard his dog is seriously ill and won't live much longer. Perhaps that's why it's drawn to the hospice, a place where life is also fleeting. Geo Rai asks her what makes life joyful. She thinks for a moment. Exercise, working at the hospice, and eating delicious food in the break room. But then, she adds a fourth thing, having someone care about her happiness. She's talking about Geo Rai. He's flustered. She continues, saying he has a beautiful smile, and she thinks about how to make him smile more. She's confessing her feelings. He's touched. Geo Rai agrees to help Seo Jin with her revenge. The key is the driver's daughter, the only witness. Geo Rai takes Seo Jin to the girl's school. As Seo Jin is about to confront her, Geo Rai stops her. The driver's daughter is also a victim, likely suffering because of her father's actions. Both girls are innocent. He doesn't want Seo Jin to hurt the girl or herself. He urges her to reconsider. Despite Geo Rai's warning, Seo Jin proceeds with her plan. She gets out of the car, enters the school under the pretense of delivering medicine, and locates the girl's classroom. Meanwhile, Geo Rai, posing as a delivery driver, brings flowers to the driver's hospital room, claiming they're from his daughter. The driver is surprised and confused. Geo Rai then video calls Seo Jin. Through the video, the driver sees his daughter standing next to Seo Jin. Seo Jin orders him to go to the police station immediately, confess and apologize. If he doesn't, she'll expose his crime to his daughter's classmates, potentially scarring her for life. Panicked, the driver apologizes profusely, begging her not to say anything. He agrees to cooperate. Relieved, Seo Jin bursts into tears. She couldn't go through with her plan after all. She hides in the bathroom, clutching a photo of herself and Hyung Jun, sobbing. When she comes out, the driver's daughter is waiting for her. The girl apologizes, both for herself and her father, and says she'll go to the police and testify against him. She won't stay silent anymore. Hearing the girl's apology, Seo Jin breaks down, overcome with remorse for threatening her. But instead of anger, the girl offers forgiveness, comfort, and an apology of her own. Seo Jin hugs her, sobbing and apologizing in return. Captain Kang arrives. He comforts both girls and takes Seo Jin back to the hospice. He'd found a piece of paper in the ambulance with the school's address. While Geo Rai denied it, Captain Kang knew he'd left it there intentionally, asking for his help with Seo Jin. As they leave, the driver's wife and daughter arrive. The girl tells her parents she wants to be a good person when she grows up. Her words finally penetrate their denial, and they realize the impact of their actions on their child. Everything seems resolved until Seo Jin tells Captain Kang that revenge wasn't Youngjun's wish, but hers. He'd briefly regained consciousness and asked her, "Are they okay?" He harbored no anger, no desire for revenge. Just then, the driver's family arrives at the hospital to apologize to Youngjun's parents. Seo Jin and the driver's daughter exchange a small smile, a silent acknowledgement of the strange way fate has brought them together. That evening, Geo Rai catches Yeonju rummaging through his bag, emptying its contents. His cash is neatly stacked beside it. He snaps at her for touching his things, grabs the bag, and puts it back in the ambulance. Later, he regrets his harsh words, realizing she was only trying to help. He rereads the will he keeps in his bag. If he dies and his money remains unspent, he wants the genie team to have it, to continue fulfilling wishes. If his dog is still alive, he wants them to care for it and ensure a peaceful passing. The last line of his will reads, "My life was worthless." He pauses, realizing how much he's changed since coming to the hospice. He talks to patients' families. He draws portraits for the elderly man. He's become part of the community. He quickly crosses out the line. The next day, he leaves a bottle of apple juice on Yeonju's desk, a silent apology. She smiles triumphantly and drinks it. Geo Rai's community service is ending, but Captain Kang hopes he'll stay and officially join the genie team. He needs a compelling reason to convince him. He remembers recognizing Geo Rai from their first encounter. The reason he orchestrated the community service assignment. It was his final wish. He holds a picture of himself with a young boy, debating whether to reveal the truth to Geo Rai. That night, Geo Rai approaches room 403, the haunted room. The door suddenly opens, and an elderly man emerges. There's another patient still inside the room. Geo Rai is startled. Captain Kang said the room was empty. Just then, the patient inside the room slightly moves a finger. He confronts Yeonju, demanding answers about room 403. She's evasive, saying the room is being renovated into a VIP room, and that's why the man left. Geo Rai is frustrated by her secrecy, reminding her that Captain Kang promised to tell him everything. Suspicious, Yeonju decides to find Captain Kang. Wild boars have been spotted in the mountains, and Captain Kang is supposedly setting traps. Yeonju goes up the mountain, but Captain Kang isn't there. He's treating a group of scruffy-looking men to dinner and giving them cab fare afterward. Back at the hospice, Geo Rai sometimes reads to the patients. Today, he's tasked with reading a steamy passage from 50 Shades of Grey. He's blushing crimson, his voice dropping to a near whisper, clearly uncomfortable reading such explicit material in public. A downpour suddenly begins. Hearing that Yeonju went to the mountain, Geo Rai, worried about her safety, goes looking for her. He frantically searches the woods, calling her name, even getting spooked by a dead boar on the path. When he finds Yeonju, his worry turns to anger, and he berates her for wandering off. Yeonju notices he appears to be crying and teases him about it. He vehemently denies it, rain and tears mixing on his face. The doctor, searching for Yeonju with an umbrella, sees them arguing in the rain and quietly leaves. After the rain stops, Yeonju tenderly buries the dead boar. It was still barely alive when she found it. She felt its desperate will to live and wanted to save it, but it was too late. She's hiding another discovery, a knife beside the boar. She picks it up and pockets it, a look of concern on her face. Back at the hospice, some volunteers gossip about Yeonju and Geo Rai, sensing a budding romance. Miss Choi, however, wants to set Yeonju up with the doctor. Geo Rai, having caught a cold from the rain, is bedridden. That night, Yeonju stays to care for him. He brings up the patient who asked him to commit murder, simply because he had a criminal record. He's hurt by the assumption. Yeonju apologizes on the patient's behalf, explaining that some patients, exhausted by their suffering, become inconsiderate, making selfish requests, and even lashing out at the staff. She hopes he can understand. He asks to see the tattoo on her arm. Death is not the end. He repeats the phrase then, in a moment of vulnerability, tells her, "I like you," before falling asleep. Yeonju, unsure whether to laugh or cry, looks at the sleeping Geo Rai and smiles. That evening, Miss Choi rides the bus home, encountering a familiar face she doesn't recognize. The woman introduces herself as the owner of a beauty salon, noting, "It's been a while since Miss Choi visited." Miss Choi explained she's been busy at the hospice, but the salon owner recalls her saying she couldn't work anymore. Miss Choi has no memory of this conversation. At home, an elderly man enters. She doesn't recognize him as her husband until he leads her to a wall of photos where she's written their names and addresses, reminders for herself. She'd urged herself not to forget the most important things, yet she's forgotten the person she loves most. The terrifying reality is that she might wake up tomorrow and forget him all over again. She breaks down sobbing. The next day, Jae Rai, recovered from his cold, encounters Yeonju and awkwardly apologizes for taking cold medicine, which clouded his judgment. He asks if he said anything inappropriate while under the influence. She pretends ignorance, but the air is thick with unspoken words. He then sees Mr. Jang, the man who'd asked him to commit murder, standing precariously by the roadside, contemplating suicide. He rushes over and pulls him back. Mr. Jang confesses that his illness has drained their savings. His wife is exhausted from caring for him, and he feels like a burden. He wonders if ending his life would be a kindness to her. Geo Rai takes him to a church and urges him to think about his true wish. He wants his wife to be free from suffering. Captain Kang appears and makes a blunt suggestion. Find his wife a good man, someone who can replace him and care for her, allowing her to live a better life. It's a harsh but practical solution. Mr. Jang understands it's the best option for his wife, but the thought is agonizing. Geo Rai criticizes Captain Kang's bluntness, accusing him of lacking empathy. Captain Kang challenges Geo Rai. If he wants to fulfill Mr. Jang's wish, he should stay on after his community service ends. Geo Rai dismisses the idea, but starts working on the problem out of habit. The doctor calls Yeonju into his office and gives her a birthday present, a necklace and a gym membership. He also apologizes for his previous harsh words. Yeonju doesn't hold it against him. They have different perspectives, and that's okay. He reminds her to take care of herself while caring for others. She accepts the necklace, but declines the gym membership. Her brother owns a gym. Just then, her brother arrives, and he sees Geo Rai first. Geo Rai, sizing up the muscular man, assumes he's an ex-con like himself and speaks to him respectfully, until Yeonju calls him brother. Much to Geo Rai's embarrassment, her brother has brought a gift for the doctor, thanking him for looking after Yeonju. He knows she's always been frail and asks the doctor to keep an eye on her. Brother, sister, and doctor chat amiably, while Geo Rai listens in from outside, looking annoyed. Meanwhile, Jun Jeong is released from prison. She's been searching for Geo Rai. She's back working for the gangster boss, making money through live streams. She's already thin, but he pressures her to lose more weight. She asks about the money she earned by befriending and sleeping with viewers, but he tells her it's all with Geo Rai. If she wants it, she'll have to find him. She tracks down the veterinarian, her and Geo Rai's childhood friend from the orphanage. She asks about Geo Rai, but he feigns ignorance. She assumes she and Geo Rai were romantically involved, and even claims Geo Rai's dog should call her Mom. Back at the orphanage, people pitied her. A beautiful child abandoned. She grew to hate compliments about her looks, but Geo Rai was different. If he had told her she was beautiful, maybe she wouldn't have attempted suicide. After she leaves, the vet immediately warns Geo Rai about her visit. Geo Rai asks him to keep his location a secret. Geo Rai's community service ends. The team prepares a cake to celebrate. He asks Captain Kang why he made him volunteer there, since they'd never met. Captain Kang, recalling his encounter with a young boy years ago, smiles at Geo Rai, suggesting they may have met before without Geo Rai realizing it. He adds that he needs someone to take over as Genie team leader. Geo Rai still decides to leave. The other volunteers understand his nature. They know he won't really go. As he starts packing his belongings, a wave of regret washes over him. He and Captain Kang talk, and Captain Kang shares his story. He was homeless and diagnosed with terminal cancer, with no will to live. Then, he received a flyer inviting him to the hospice. On his way there, he unexpectedly smiled. He'd lived as a homeless man to punish himself, but in that moment, he wanted to live his final days without pain. He found his purpose at the hospice, becoming the Genie team leader. He'd lived in room 403 wanting to hide his illness. Now his cancer has returned, and he wants Geo Rai to take his place. Geo Rai wants to know who's currently in room 403, but Captain Kang seems unaware. They go to investigate and receive a call from Yeonju. Geo Rai's dog is vomiting uncontrollably. Its condition is deteriorating rapidly. Geo Rai is heartbroken. The dog originally belonged to an online couple. He'd found it abandoned on the street after it became ill, and took it in. He believes the dog's final wish is to see the couple again. He takes the dog and searches for them, eventually spotting their car. He follows them to a pet shop, where they buy a new dog. Enraged, he confronts them, stopping the sale, knowing the new dog will eventually suffer the same fate. He then furiously kicks their car, forcing them to look at his dying dog, demanding to know if they abandoned it. They've forgotten its name and even its gender. This fuels Gio Rai's rage, and he continues his assault on their car. Seeing Gio Rai's relentless attack, the young man finally remembers the dog's name. Yanju and the doctor arrive just in time, telling Gio Rai that revenge isn't what his dog wants. The woman with the couple has been filming the entire incident, threatening to call the police. Yanju grabs the young man's phone, threatens to call the police herself, smashes it, and tells them they'll all be turning themselves in. She then leads Gio Rai to a large screen. Captain Kang has prepared a gift for him and his dog. Yanju explains that the dog's final wish is to be in the arms of someone who loves him. The video on the screen shows the dog running free on a road, fulfilling Gio Rai's earlier wish to let his dog run free. Gio Rai watches the video, memories of happier times flooding back. The dog, oblivious, watches the screen. Gio Rai's grief overwhelms him. Unseen, Junjiang watches from a distance, having followed the doctor and Yanju. After saying goodbye to his dog, Yanju and Gio Rai turn themselves in. Fortunately, the couple decides not to press charges, and Gio Rai is released after a brief detention. He's heartbroken, clutching the small box containing his dog's ashes. He often sits alone, talking to the box. Unexpectedly, he finds himself wanting to live. Since coming to the hospice, he's begun to feel human, experiencing a long-forgotten sense of happiness. He has a newfound appreciation for life. Meanwhile, a bald gangster orders his men to find Gio Rai. One of them sees a news report about the incident with the dog and recognizes Gio Rai. Gio Rai takes on a new assignment, transporting an elderly man to the zoo. The man worked at the zoo for 30 years, and his final wish is to see the giraffe he raised from a calf. The giraffe, recognizing the old man's voice, slowly approaches the ambulance, lowering its head inside. The genie team is deeply touched by this tender reunion. After saying goodbye, the old man passes away peacefully, without regrets. Since witnessing Gio Rai and Yanju's tender farewell to the dog, Junjiang has been spiraling, seeking solace in alcohol. Another gangster silently observes her, feeling a mixture of pity and empathy. He notices her distress and asks if she's found Gio Rai. He then cruelly taunts her, saying Gio Rai probably doesn't find her beautiful anymore. His words strike a nerve, and she begins to cry. Meanwhile, the genie team arranges blind dates for Mr. Zhang's wife, fulfilling his wish. This is Gio Rai's first solo mission, and he plans it meticulously, even enlisting Captain Kang to observe the date. Afterward, Captain Kang visits the recently deceased elderly man's grave with flowers, then visits the graves of his own wife and child. He reflects on his past, remembering when he was caught up in a get-rich-quick scheme, drinking heavily and keeping bad company. His wife warned him these people were untrustworthy, and that he was ruining his life. Blinded by ambition, he ignored her, even becoming angry with her. He only realized his mistake when his life fell apart. At the hospice, Miss Choi has another episode of memory loss. She's busily cleaning, as always. Her husband finds her and calls her wife, but she doesn't recognize him, becoming confused and embarrassed. Yanju finds this strange. Miss Choi remembers everything except her husband. Her final wish is to visit Hojue, the dementia village in the Netherlands, a patient-friendly community where residents can live normal lives without confinement. Despite her memory loss, her husband smiles and follows her, accepting her confused state. He even puts on a cleaning uniform and works alongside her. He feels her love every day, even if she doesn't remember him. Each day feels like a new beginning, a bittersweet joy. Mr. Zhang, whose wish is for his wife to find a new husband, has a nightmare. He dreams of his wedding, watching his bride walk towards him in her wedding dress, when another man appears and leads her away. The beautiful dream turns into a nightmare, and he wakes up in a cold sweat. Captain Kang visits him with a video of his wife's first date, praising the new man, and even suggesting they marry while Mr. Zhang is still alive, so he can witness her happiness. Mr. Zhang can't take it anymore, and tells Captain Kang to stop. Captain Kang turns serious, asking why he made the wish in the first place, if he couldn't bear the thought of his wife with another man. He even asked Gio Rai to kill him, burdening him with that emotional weight. Mr. Zhang breaks down, sobbing. Back in the ambulance, Captain Kang experiences sharp pain and needs medication for relief. Gio Rai tricks him into returning to the hospice, where a surprise birthday party awaits. The genie team gathers around, singing, presenting a cake, and giving gifts. Rai is there too. Captain Kang remembers past birthdays with his family, a pang of regret hitting him. He confides in the cook, questioning why he didn't appreciate his happiness when he had it. The cook, understanding his regret, comforts him, saying young people rarely grasp the meaning of life. It takes time and experience. Captain Kang weeps. Rai, cleaning up, apologizes to Yeonju for his outburst with the couple and their dog. He regrets letting her see that side of him. He cares so much about her opinion because he likes her. He confesses his feelings again and asks her on a date. After confirming he's not delirious from medication, she agrees on one condition. She plans the date. The next day, a hopeful Rai, dressed to impress, is subjected to Yeonju's unconventional date, CPR practice, volunteering at an animal shelter, and hiking. Finally, in the evening, they get to the coffee date Rai wanted, only to find the cafe closed. Despite the exhausting day, they're both happy. Walking back, they hold hands, bickering playfully about who confessed first and who likes whom more. They share a deep kiss, a perfect ending to their unusual date. But their happiness is short-lived. Back at the hospice, an unwelcome guest awaits, Jung, who introduces herself as Rai's girlfriend. Yeonju is stunned. Rai is instantly dragged back into his painful past. He tries to get rid of Jung, but she threatens to harm herself. She insists they're family, and family stays together, even if it's unhappy, even if it's exhausting. Rai begs her to leave him alone, but she warns him that if he finds happiness elsewhere, she'll die with him. Jung orders him to pack his things, telling him the bald gangster has found him and is on his way. For Rai, facing those thugs is less terrifying than returning to a life with Jung. He begs her to give him more time. He's finally starting to understand what happiness feels like at the hospice. As always, Jung uses self-harm as leverage, and he reluctantly agrees. Before leaving, Yeonju intercepts him. She has so much to say but simply asks, "Why aren't you taking your bag of money?" He leaves the money behind, entrusting it to Captain Kang. He tells Jung he couldn't find it. She clearly doesn't believe him, but doesn't press the issue. Jung takes him to a small apartment. Emotionally detached, she plays games on her phone, casually threatening him. He urges her to see a doctor, but she refuses, insisting her feelings for him aren't an illness. Rai, now separated from Yeonju, gets a new tattoo. "Death is not the end," a phrase Yeonju had drunkenly uttered. He endures Jung's constant presence, her nightly embrace a form of torture for him. He hates physical intimacy. Yeonju struggles to accept his departure, throwing herself into her exercise routine, trying to numb the pain. She tells herself he's just gone back to where he belongs. But she's been greedy, clinging to that brief taste of happiness. He's taken away her only chance at happiness. Jung and Rai's story began at the orphanage. Jung, with her striking beauty, was chosen for adoption by a wealthy family, but she wasn't happy about it. Rai approached her, saying staying at the orphanage was better than being with a bad family. He offered to be her brother, her protector. She agreed, rejecting the adoption. This is where Rai's nightmare began. He wanted to be a supportive brother figure, but she wanted more. She wanted to be his wife, but they are two alike, both burdened by darkness. Rai craves the company of someone filled with light and a love for life, not someone constantly contemplating its end. Overwhelmed by her emotions, Yeonju develops a high fever. She stumbles down the hallway, weak and disoriented, trying to ask for help, but collapses before she can finish her sentence. She doesn't notice a shadowy figure standing nearby, holding a weapon. She wakes up in the on-call room, a long gash on her neck bandaged by the doctor. The next day, an elderly man with terminal cancer is found unconscious at home. An unfinished letter on his table. He regains consciousness and seeks out Captain Kang, asking for his help. In his younger days, he was a formidable police detective. His final wish is to find someone, but his memory of the details is hazy after all these years, making the search nearly impossible. Captain Kang agrees to try. That evening, the doctor takes Yeonju to dinner and confesses his feelings. He's not usually one to care about others, but he's drawn to her. He asks for a chance, even if it's just as a backup boyfriend. He drives her home, solicitous and caring. He asks about the night she collapsed. She assumed he'd found her and carried her to the on-call room, but he says he only arrived after receiving a call from the on-call room staff. After he leaves, loneliness washes over Yeonju. She misses Rai, tears welling in her eyes. The next morning, Captain Kang asks why she avoided Rai at Mr. Jang's wedding. She'd assumed Rai was afraid of her getting too close. but Captain Kang explains it's the opposite. Geo Rai feels unworthy, trapped in his own darkness, afraid to taint her light. Captain Kang urges her to reach out to Geo Rai to pull him out of his misery. He emphasizes that Junjong's feelings aren't love, but a toxic obsession. Encouraged, Yeonju decides to bring Geo Rai back. Meanwhile, Geo Rai, using Junjong's phone while she's distracted, sends a text message to the bald gangster, giving him his current address and signing it with his name. He stands on the roof of a tall building, filled with dread, waiting for the gangster to arrive. He wants it all to end. Years ago, Geo Rai had received a settlement and planned to attend college, but the bald gangster stole the money, believing orphans like Geo Rai weren't worthy of higher education. They should work for him, becoming thugs like himself. But Geo Rai refused, unwilling to be indebted to the gangster and live a life of thuggery. Just then, Yeonju arrives on the rooftop. Before Geo Rai can speak, Junjong appears. Fearing she'll lose control, he tries to get Yeonju to leave, but Yeonju is fearless, even engaging Junjong in a fight. She understands that to deal with someone like Junjong, she has to meet her crazy with crazy. Geo Rai pulls Yeonju away, and as they reach the hallway, Yeonju locks the door behind them. Turning back to confront Junjong, she throws down her boxing gloves and lets Junjong hit her. When Junjong is spent, Yeonju retaliates, knocking her down, then asks why she's living such a destructive life, always focused on death. Junjong, almost hysterical, claims Yeonju can't understand because she's never experienced such pain. Yeonju, letting her go, gives Junjong her prized boxing gloves, telling her to protect herself. She adds that if the pain becomes too much, Junjong can come to the hospice. She'll help her, just like she helped Geo Rai. She then leaves. Geo Rai, waiting outside, pulls Yeonju away, trying to escape, but the bald gangster arrives, attacking Geo Rai, demanding he stay with Junjong. Geo Rai pleads for his freedom, wanting a normal life, just once. The gangster ignores his pleas, blaming Yeonju for Geo Rai's misery. Geo Rai breaks free and runs with Yeonju. Meanwhile, Junjong stands on the edge of the rooftop, taking a step into the void. The gangster realizes it too late. Junjong falls. He rushes her to the hospital, holding her unconscious hand, gazing at her with a love both fierce and possessive. She's suffering because of Geo Rai. He'd first seen her at the orphanage during a gift-giving event, when the well-meaning staff expressed pity for such a beautiful child being abandoned. Junjong silently turned and walked away. She passed the bald gangster, and he was instantly captivated. But Geo Rai got to her first. Junjong and Geo Rai become a family, while the bald gangster can only watch them from afar, hidden in a tree. Captain Kang had asked some friends to keep an eye on Geo Rai and Junjong. When Junjong fell, they immediately informed him. He sighs and decides to keep it from Geo Rai. When Geo Rai returns to the hospice, the volunteers don't scold him for leaving without notice. Instead, they express concern, asking if he's okay if he's eaten, offering him a cake, and welcoming him back with warmth. He goes to pour himself some water and finds his usual mug already in its place, a small gesture that fills him with a sense of belonging. That evening, Yeonju enters room 403 to treat the patient inside. She has complicated feelings about this man. He's Captain Kang's enemy. Captain Kang used to run a pork bone soup restaurant and entered into a failed business venture with this man. Captain Kang reported him to the authorities, and the man disappeared. He later tracked Captain Kang down, arriving at the hospice with a group of thugs, demanding to see him and threatening anyone who interfered, causing chaos. Shortly after that incident, Yeonju found the man unconscious on a hillside. She suspects Captain Kang might be involved. A kind-hearted hospice patient, witnessing the man's collapse, had asked Yeonju to save him. It was his dying wish. So, she secretly brought the man to room 403, keeping it from Captain Kang, and she and the other team members have been caring for him in secret. Lost in thought, she's startled when the patient on the bed begins convulsing. She rushes to find the doctor. Meanwhile, Captain Kang talks with Geo Rai at the church, asking if he wants to see his real family. Geo Rai has few memories of his family. His mother left when he was young, and his father was an abusive alcoholic. The scar on his neck is a permanent reminder of his father's violence. Captain Kang remembers seeing a similar scar on Geo Rai years ago. He'd gone to a house and was brutally attacked by a bald gangster. After escaping, he walked down the road without shoes. Geo Rai, the boy in the house, had brought him his shoes. Looking down, Captain Kang noticed the boy wasn't wearing shoes either. He was afraid the sound of his footsteps would alert his abusive father. Captain Kang urged the boy to run away, to escape his father. Heeding his advice, the boy fled to an orphanage, starting a new life. Despite escaping his father, he's always wondered if he'd become like him. Captain Kang dismisses the notion, saying he met a child just like Geo Rai, with a similar father, and that child grew up to be one of the kindest people in the world. The doctor, learning about the man hidden in room 403, disapproves of Yeonju's actions, but she has her reasons, which she can't reveal. She can't bear the thought of Captain Kang becoming a suspect, while the man remains a victim. Moreover, she's known about Captain Kang's cancer relapse for a while. Regardless of the consequences, she'll protect him during his remaining time, ensuring he has a peaceful end. When Geo Rai comes looking for Yeonju, he overhears her conversation with the doctor. His first reaction is concern for Yeonju. She's been carrying this secret alone, under immense pressure. He sits beside her and gently feeds her a piece of cake. As she continues eating, they don't notice the elevator doors opening behind them. Meanwhile, Captain Kang's health is deteriorating. He suffers from uncontrollable coughing fits and relies on pain medication. On a quiet evening, sitting alone in the ambulance, gazing at the moon, he thinks of his deceased family, believing he'll soon be reunited with them. The next day, Yeonju finds Captain Kang and urges him to undergo chemotherapy. He was saved once, she reminds him. He should live for himself, at least once. But he feels his current life with the genie team is his way of living for himself. Even though it's dedicated to others, he has no regrets. Elsewhere, Junjong wakes up in the hospital to find the bald gangster at her bedside. The top gangster boss arrives and, seeing the bald gangster's devotion to Junjong, becomes enraged and beats him. While ostensibly guarding Junjong, the bald gangster's affection for her is obvious. The boss has warned him repeatedly to stay detached and not to get emotionally involved, but he's ignored the warnings. Captain Kang is meeting an old friend. Geo Rai meticulously dresses him in a borrowed suit and tie, even polishing his shoes. The friend works at a television station and has heard about Captain Kang's failed business ventures. He can't resist a few digs, boasting about his own promotion to station director. Captain Kang isn't there to reminisce. He's following up on the elderly man's wish. 50 years ago, the station aired an interview about a supermarket murder, but the producer never completed the segment. Captain Kang wants to contact the producer if he's still with the company. The friend agrees, but insists on dinner first, inviting several other former colleagues. During the meal, they comment on how much Captain Kang has changed since his entrepreneurial days. Back then, he'd boasted about making it big in the entertainment industry, but he was unknowingly involved in a prostitution ring, exploiting young women. His friends tried to warn him, but he dismissed them as jealous and small-minded. He later lost everything, ending up homeless. They bring up these past failures, and Captain Kang calmly admits his mistakes, apologizing for his arrogance and naivete. He was blinded by greed, he says, unable to appreciate the people around him. After dinner, he's surprised to see the hospice ambulance waiting outside. Geo Rai, who has arrived unnoticed, rushes out, bowing respectfully and addressing Captain Kang as chairman. Playing up his importance to save face in front of his friends, he opens the door for Captain Kang and then drives him back to the hospice. On the way, Captain Kang notices the new shoes Geo Rai bought for him. He tries to give them back, but Geo Rai refuses. They laugh and bicker like father and son. With the producer's contact information, Captain Kang inquires about the old case and finds the person the elderly man has been searching for. The old man is grateful. The person he wants to see lives far away, but he's determined, even if it means traveling abroad, even if he dies on the way. He was once a police officer and tortured a suspect into confessing. He's carried the guilt of that act for years. Before he dies, he wants to atone, to find peace. The next day, Geo Rai, Captain Kang, and Yeonju embark on a long journey with the elderly man. It's not just a trip for redemption, it's a road trip for the genie team. At a toll booth, the two men get out to buy snacks. Geo Rai keeps mentioning Yeonju, and Captain Kang, finding this endearing, can't help but smile. He seizes the opportunity to ask Geo Rai if he's ever kissed a girl. He gets the answer he expected. It seems Geo Rai has kissed Yeonju. Geo Rai returns to the ambulance and dozes off. Memories flicker through his mind as he sleeps. Suddenly, he hears Yeonju's voice, panicked and calling his name. He jolts awake, rushes out of the vehicle, and finds Captain Kang collapsed amidst a crowd of onlookers. In his semi-conscious state, Captain Kang flashes back to 20 years ago, when his wife and child were still alive. He didn't appreciate them. He was driving them home when he received a call from his friend, June, and decided to send his family home in a taxi, claiming he had an urgent matter to attend to. He went to a karaoke bar and drank heavily. A call from the hospital sobered him instantly. His wife and child had been in an accident on their way home and were dead. He confronted June, blaming him, but June denied responsibility and beat him up. June's young son watched from a doorway. Captain Kang beckoned him closer. Suddenly, Captain Kang wakes up, the image of a young, vulnerable Geo Rai, merging with the present. Geo Rai and Yanju urge him to rest and to abandon this mission, but he refuses to leave his post. Geo Rai agrees, but on one condition. After this trip, Captain Kang will start cancer treatment. He wants him to live, to fulfill more wishes. Before starting the journey, Geo Rai spots a woman who looks exactly like Jun Jong. He stares, stunned until she turns around, and he realizes his mistake, breathing a sigh of relief. He's torn between avoiding Jun Jong and wanting to know if she's okay. Yan Ju, sensing his internal conflict, suggests he call her, but he refuses. She can't understand his complicated relationship with Jun Jong. She hasn't lived through it. On the road, Captain Kang talks with the elderly man and learns his cancer has spread from his lungs to his liver. He'd initially planned to let it run its course, but Geo Rai and Yan Ju convinced him to fight. He knows treatment will be difficult, but he's made a promise. The elderly man nods in agreement. Back at the hospice, Miss Choi has another memory lapse, believing she's a cleaning volunteer, not realizing she's a patient. Lost and confused, she starts crying in a corner. The patient in room 403 approaches her with a pair of scissors. Later, her husband arrives to pick her up. He's puzzled to see her emerge with noticeably shorter hair and scissors in hand, but doesn't comment. Today, she remembers him, and they talk about their life together. He takes the scissors from her and throws them in the trash. They go home. In the middle of the night, Miss Choi cries out in her sleep, telling someone to stop. Her husband wakes up, watching her thrashing and muttering, a sense of unease settling over him. The next day, he visits room 403. The patient appears to be sleeping peacefully, but as he turns to leave, the patient's eyes open. Miss Choi's condition worsens, causing concern. Her husband wants to move her to the Netherlands as soon as possible. He's also disturbed by her mysteriously shortened hair. She has no explanation, only remembering cleaning the fourth-floor bathroom. He realizes the patient in room 403 is the only person who could have cut her hair. He suspects the patient has regained consciousness, but is keeping it a secret. The genie team reaches their destination. The elderly man is searching for someone who lives in the mountains. Their wheelchair malfunctions, so Geo Rai carries the old man up the steep path. They reach the top and find the house, only to learn the man they're seeking died last year. Heartbroken, the elderly man asks about his life after prison. The man's wife explains that his legs were crippled from being incarcerated for so long. His daughter adds a poignant detail. Her father always said, "No matter how much it hurts, endure it to the end." Overcome with remorse, the elderly man wants to visit the man's grave, but it's located on the highest peak. Once again, Geo Rai offers to carry him. Despite the arduous climb, he insists on carrying the old man himself. He remembers his first assignment at the hospice, driving the ambulance recklessly with a patient in the back. Captain Kang scolded him, but Geo Rai callously dismissed it, saying the patient was dying anyway. He never apologized and has regretted his insensitivity ever since. This time, no matter how difficult, he'll help the old man fulfill his wish. They finally reach the grave. The elderly man has written a letter of apology and asked Captain Kang to read it aloud. He's lived with regret for 46 years, longing to atone for his actions, but it's too late. As a young man, he'd seen the man leaving a house with a bloody knife. The man was immediately arrested. The police pressured him to testify, and although he'd seen the man leaving the house, he wasn't certain if he was the murderer. To avoid trouble, he lied, sacrificing his conscience for convenience. His false testimony sent an innocent man to prison. Hearing the letter, Geo Rai is furious. Had he known about the elderly man's cruel act, he wouldn't have agreed to this trip. He feels the man is undeserving of redemption. Disgusted, he turns and walks away. Captain Kang understands that if the elderly man were a truly evil person like June, perhaps he couldn't forgive him either. Yanju is curious about Captain Kang's connection to June. He'd borrowed money from June to start his restaurant. Before the due date, he worked tirelessly to repay the loan. He urged June to abandon his illegal activities and find legitimate work, especially since he had a child. June's face hardened, and he asked, "What's legitimate work, anyway?" They ended up working together, but Captain Kang's greed led him down a dark path. Geo Rai, still fuming, takes a bus back, refusing to ride in the ambulance. He broods over the elderly man's past. At a rest stop, he sees the ambulance parked nearby. He gets out of the bus and returns to the ambulance, sheepishly claiming he'd gotten off to buy snacks and missed the bus. Back at the hospice, the elderly man has a final wish for his assets to be donated to a specific cause. Meanwhile, the bald gangster continues to care for Junjong. She realizes he likes her, but he denies it. She impulsively kisses him, and he recoils, pushing her away. This rejection fuels his inner turmoil. While she's oblivious, teasing him playfully, he's struggling to contain his emotions, so distracted that he walks into another man on the street. The man protests, and the bald gangster unleashes his fury on him. A few days later, Junjong and the bald gangster go on a date. He's shy and awkward. At the movie theater, Junjong suddenly suggests he kill her and Geo Rai. He's furious, but clenches his fists and endures her dark humor. That evening, Geo Rai goes to room 403. Yanju asked him to look after the patient overnight, but he's reluctant, knowing the man is a criminal. But he reminds himself that the man is also a patient and enters the room. He angrily berates the man for hurting Captain Kang. The patient suddenly wakes up, clutching Geo Rai's hand, repeatedly saying, "I was wrong." Geo Rai, startled, flees. As he runs, he sees a fleeting image of his younger self. The patient is June, his father, the man responsible for the death of Captain Kang's family. This realization changes everything. He can no longer face Captain Kang with the same ease, a tension now hanging between them. He struggles with whether to reveal June's identity. Meanwhile, Junjong remains fixated on the idea of a suicide pact with Geo Rai. The bald gangster finally gives in, and she offers a rare thank you. She's always seen him as a brother, she says, and wishes him a long life. He leaves without a word, tears streaming down his face as he reaches his car. Miss Choi's condition deteriorates, and the trip to the Netherlands needs to be arranged quickly. Captain Kang tells Geo Rai about Hojue, explaining they have more than twice as many staff as residents, playing vital roles in the village's daily life, creating a sense of normalcy for the patients. The comfortable, engaging environment helps slow the progression of the disease. He asks Geo Rai to research first-class flights and other travel arrangements. He also mentions his upcoming cancer treatment and encourages Geo Rai to spend more time with Yanju. Their bond has deepened, and they now interact with the easy banter of father and son. On the third day, Geo Rai wakes up to find Captain Kang gone. He's annoyed he didn't get to say goodbye. The hospice feels empty without him. Later, he passes a patient's room and sees a young boy and his older sister keeping vigil by their grandmother's bedside. The sister is clearly stressed, caring for both her grandmother and her rambunctious younger brother. The boy, playing a video game, casually mentions their biggest fear. If their grandmother dies, they'll be sent to an orphanage. The sister, heartbroken, slips out of the room to cry. She notices the box containing Geo Rai's dog's ashes. He explains it's his son, and that he misses him very much. The girl, old enough to understand the concept of death but still innocent, is touched. He encourages her to ask her grandmother if she has any unfulfilled wishes, offering to help. He then makes a delicious pot of noodles for the siblings. The children eat happily, bickering occasionally. Geo Rai envies their close bond, a stark contrast to his relationship with Junjong, which is filled with arguments and resentment. He again sees the patient from room 403 praying in the church. He asks the man if he misses his son. The man says, of course. Geo Rai tells him the first person he should apologize to is his son. The man says he will beg for his son's forgiveness if he ever sees him again. That evening, Geo Rai sees Yanju walking home, eyes closed. Worried she'll fall, he offers her a ride. After dropping her off, he mentions he's hungry, and she invites him for noodles. He's excited, assuming she's inviting him to her apartment, but she takes him to a street vendor. After a few drinks, Yanju becomes emotional, crying uncontrollably as she recalls Captain Kang's hardships. He started chemotherapy and is losing his hair rapidly. The next day, the doctor checks on the patient in room 403. The man appears to be sleeping soundly and doesn't respond. After the doctor leaves, Geo Rai slips into the room. As he suspected, the patient was awake, stroking a small snail. The man asks him to keep his awakening a secret. He seems to have genuinely lost his memory. The only thing he remembers is having a son. He recalls weeping with joy at his son's birth. Geo Rai, unmoved by the man's amnesia, urges him to apologize to everyone at the hospice for the trouble he caused. The man promises to do so once he remembers everything. He asks Geo Rai to take him to the church, and Geo Rai complies. Watching the man weeping in the church, Geo Rai asks the doctor if it's possible for someone on the verge of death to undergo such a dramatic personality change. The doctor confirms it's entirely possible, and then reminds Geo Rai to treat Yeonju well. Miss Choi's condition worsens. Her husband searches for her frantically, finally finding her hiding in a bathroom storage closet, drinking instant coffee, just like she used to when he kept vigil by his mother's bedside. Her mind has regressed to that time. Elsewhere, the bald gangster drinks alone. Hearing a man harassing a woman, he smashes a bottle over the man's head, drawing blood. Covered in blood, he calmly tells the shocked onlookers he is just practicing his assassination skills. If he succeeded this time, he'd have experience for the next time. Elsewhere, Jae Rai takes Ki-chun to the church again. This time, Ki-chun remembers more. He'd always assumed his wife took their son, but now he's not so sure. He can't remember if his son went missing, or if he abandoned him. He searched everywhere, but couldn't find him. If he ever finds his son, he wants to apologize for leaving him. Geo Rai, inspired by the two siblings, begins training them as junior genie team members. They learn to cook from the head chef. Regarding their grandmother's wish, she's mostly unresponsive and unable to communicate, so they don't know what it is. Geo Rai suggests they guess, based on what they know about her. They remember she loves peppermint candy and the plants in their house. He takes them home, but they find all the plants withered and dead. He suggests they draw the plants and bring the drawings to their grandmother. While drawing, Geo Rai discovers the boy, despite his poor artistic skills, knows the names and meanings of all the flowers, suggesting a hidden talent. Back at the hospice, Geo Rai searches his car and realizes his bag of money is missing. He heads inside, only to find two strangers there to pick up the siblings. They claim to be their cousins. Geo Rai, noticing their heavy makeup, tattoos, and generally unsavory appearance, is suspicious. He tells them to leave, saying he needs to consult with the hospice staff. The cousins question his authority. When the boy mentions he's the genie team leader, they scoff. Yeonju arrives, confirming Geo Rai's role and sending the two women away. After they leave, Geo Rai asks Yeonju if those women are really the children's cousins. He worries they'll be mistreated and wants to prevent that. As the doctor is leaving work, he hears a noise. He turns and sees Ki-chun walking down the hallway. He's surprised, returning to room 403 to find the patient seemingly asleep. But he remembers the patient was on oxygen earlier, and now isn't. Meanwhile, Jae Rai drives an exhausted Yeonju home. She falls asleep in the car. He thinks about his missing money and asks Yeonju what he should do if it's stolen. He speculates that Ki-chun is the prime suspect. Too tired to care, Yeonju continues sleeping. He can't bring himself to tell her about Ki-chun being awake. He initially wanted to protect Ki-chun out of kindness, but now there's another reason. He'd recently seen a photo of the patient and a young boy, with an inscription on the back. My first meeting with my son, Jae Rai. Ki-chun is his father. Troubled, Jae Rai takes a bus to his old orphanage. Memories of his childhood flood back during the journey. He'd snuck away while his father was distracted, running desperately towards the orphanage, collapsing at the gate just as he reached safety. At the orphanage, he asks the director if anyone ever searched for him. She immediately says no. Geo Rai was different from the other children. Their parents or relatives always came looking for them. His family never appeared, a clear sign of abandonment, she says. Captain Kang starts his cancer treatment. One day, seeking fresh air on the rooftop, he sees a woman smoking. He recognizes her as Jun Jong. He asks the nurses about her. She'd attempted suicide, they explain, and was brought to the hospital with injuries. They add that a man, presumably her boyfriend, visits regularly, but she keeps asking him to kill her and someone else. Captain Kang sits beside Jun Jong and offers her a lollipop. He tells her about his cancer and hospitalization, then asks why she's there. She admits her suicide attempt. He's glad she survived, telling her that sometimes failure isn't a bad thing. Because of her failure, Jun Jong is still alive. She finds Captain Kang strange and avoids him. That evening, Ki-chun wanders out seeking food. The cook catches him rummaging in the kitchen. She's startled but prepares a bowl of noodles and some side dishes for him. Sitting at a distance, she asks about Captain Kang and why he cut Miss Choi's hair. He explains he didn't. Miss Choi cut her own hair, copying his hairstyle. Geo Rai returns to the hospice and finds Ki-chun eating noodles on the floor in the hallway. He takes him back to his room and introduces himself. A flicker of recognition crosses Ki-chun's face. He knows this is his son. He tries to hold Geo Rai's hand, but Geo Rai pulls away. Ki-chun puts on a pitiful display, apologizing and claiming he just woke up, confused and disoriented. With no memory, unsure if he's even alive, he begs for Geo Rai's forgiveness, but Jae Rai is unmoved. He feels no connection to this man. As Jae Rai leaves, Ki-chun's face twists into a sinister smile. It was all an act. He recognized Jio Rai immediately and even stole his will, which stated his intention to leave his money to the genie team. He doesn't want his son involved with them, so he steals the bag of money from Jio Rai's car. In the will, Jio Rai describes his life as worthless, and Ki-chun believes Jio Rai's misery is a direct result of leaving him. He decides to play a game with Jio Rai. The doctor is worried. He discovered Ki-chun awake and was about to call the police when Ki-chun appeared behind him with a knife, threatening him and Yeonju. The doctor is conflicted about whether to tell Yeonju. Just then, news arrives that the sibling's grandmother is in critical condition. The doctor, after assessing the situation, pronounces her dead and has her moved to the morgue. The drawings of plants cover the grandmother's bed, and the children, in tears, say their goodbyes. In her final moments, she seems to awaken, sitting up between the children, bathed in sunlight, surrounded by images of her beloved plants. The children worry about their future, and Jio Rai steps forward, assuring their grandmother he'll take care of them. He tells her not to worry and to rest peacefully. He knows this is her final wish. As he speaks, she quietly passes away. At the funeral, the children's aunt arrives, glued to her phone. Jio Rai doesn't want the children living with her. He'd recently visited her fried chicken restaurant and observed the struggling business, even witnessing a brawl. It's not a suitable environment for children. He begins to seriously consider taking them in himself. He hugs the boy tightly, a fatherly gesture, and Yeonju teases him about having another son. The children had planned to use their allowance money to buy their grandmother peppermint candy for her journey to heaven. But a relative stole it. Jio Rai chases after him, grabbing his hair and retrieving the money. He's increasingly convinced the children shouldn't stay with their relatives. After getting the money back, he washes his face in the bathroom, trying to calm down. He catches his reflection in the mirror and sees his father's face staring back at him. He tells himself he's not his father, he won't become a violent man. The aunt takes the children away. Jio Rai urges them to look after each other and to stay together. They part with heavy hearts. He promises to find a way to bring them back to the hospice and gives them his phone number. Meanwhile, the bald gangster, having failed to capture Jio Rai, is brutally beaten by the boss, who threatens to take his organs if he doesn't get the money back. Desperate, he visits Junjong in the hospital, leaving a photo of himself by her bedside. Junjong is discharged from the hospital. Before leaving, she visits Captain Kang, finding him in pain. She calls for a doctor and later brings him food, a gesture of unexpected kindness. She initially didn't recognize him, but then remembered him from the genie team. He's suspicious of her motives, wondering if she's trying to get to Jio Rai. She denies it, claiming she was just bored, and that it had nothing to do with Jio Rai. Later, Captain Kang's friend from the television station visits. Captain Kang asks him to investigate an old apartment fire that killed 3 people. Back at the hospice, the doctor still hasn't told anyone about Ki-chun's threat. He subtly warns Jio Rai that people don't undergo complete personality changes after a minor injury. Later, Jio Rai asks him again, this time specifically mentioning brain damage. The doctor confirms that such dramatic transformations are rare. That evening, Yeonju visits room 403 and finds it empty. Ki-chun, having changed his clothes, appears before Jio Rai, greeting him with a smile. Jio Rai ignores him, telling him not to use his name. As Yeonju approaches, she overhears Ki-chun muttering, "Yes, you're my son." She's stunned to realize he's Jio Rai's father. After Ki-chun leaves, she scolds Jio Rai for not alerting her that the